Hello and belated happy Wednesday and happy Friday, everyone. Today we're going to be going over Tinto Talk number 26, which actually has a very interesting piece of news. It, of course, is 2 days old, so it's yesterday's news, but it is going over the different country types, not just landed country types, that we will be receiving in Europa Universalis 5, aka the big top secret game that no one knows the name of, except we all know the name of it, and it'll be very funny if they name it something other than Europa Universalis 5. And I figured while we're at it, we might as well go over the Happy Friday of today, their Tinto map for the Horn of Africa, because this released today. So this is what we'll be doing, so it'll be a little bit longer, and we'll be doing these two things. If you just were interested in the map, you can, of course, skip ahead, where we will be discussing that. Okay, hopefully there's a little bit of wood here, but if we know Victoria 3's resource kind of pool, there's probably not wood here. So let's get right into it. This is a relatively short one. Welcome, everyone, to the 26th Tinto Talks, the Happy Wednesday. It is the happiest of Wednesdays, except it's Friday. But, you know, it's a happy Wednesday in our hearts, where we tell you interesting information. Interesting is an adjective that has not yet been used. We've used top secret, we've used big secret, we've used big top, and we, of course, use secret top, but we have not used interesting yet. So that is interesting that we're using interesting. Information about our super top secret game, there it is, with the codename of Project Caesar, aka Project Teaser. Previously in grand strategy games, playable entities, or countries we usually refer to them, always required you to own land, and their existence was based on owning land. There are a couple of grand strategy games where this is not the case, but by and large that is the case. You annexed and eliminated a country by taking all their land. Now, during 4 years since we crafted the first iteration of this system, things have changed, and you will soon have landless playable characters in Crusader Kings 3, which is very exciting. Coming up in Crusader Kings 3, but we do see kind of the classic of Europa Universalis 5 so far, which is poaching good features from other games and kind of meshing them in to make a super game. It's a Frankenstein game. They never stopped to ask if they should. They only asked if they could. So far, I'm so excited about everything for this game. The only thing that leaves me a little bit worried is performance. Okay. But we do see this kind of infographic for country type, which is going to have a list of country types, which is going to have settled country, which is your traditional country, army-based country, which is kind of self-explanatory, extraterritorial country, and society of pops. This tooltip may make it 100% clear, kind of, but we'll get into it. We've been talking about making a navy-based country type, aka pirates, but it would be fairly easy to do, but we haven't really found any country that fits that category. But that's not a reason not to do it, because okay, there was no Sunset Invasion, but that's in a ton of your games too. You could put a feature in there just for the purpose of letting the players make their own sort of thing. There's certainly the make country feature in multiple games, and maybe you could just make it a make country feature, or maybe you could make a country that's supposed to be some confederation of pirates, but they're right, there's, as far as I know, no country that is based at sea without owning land. But okay. Settled countries. These are countries that are based on their owning locations, and this is just kind of regular old vanilla type countries as we understand them. Army-based countries. This type of country is very similar to the location-based with a few differences. While they still can do everything that a location-based country does, they also have a strong advantage and disadvantage in comparison. The advantage is that is the fact that as long as they have an army, then the country will continue to exist, which we will use to simulate redacted, among other things. So that's my favorite. And so this is, as I understand it, meaning that they are probably going to have territory. They are probably going to own locations. And if you have an army, is it possible I guess if you had an army in allied territory, you could have an army while still having lost your locations? Or you would have not just de facto ownership, but de jure ownership. But as maybe you can get full annexed with this, and then all your territories annexed, but you still have the army because you made the peace deal, and it'll be difficult for you to recruit back up, but as long as you can maintain food supplies and like this type of stuff, and you have enough money, you could just run around and eventually deck on someone. And so this is, of course, a very interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. As far as from something we've gleaned later, this is implied that this is playable, and it kind of refers to the hordes. The disadvantage, depending on your point of view, is that if a country does not have an army at all, it can shatter into multiple pieces. So if your army completely gets shattered, though, even if you don't lose a war, maybe you just completely fall apart, even if you own a lot of territory in a de jure sense. If your army gets stack wiped, a la, European Universalis 4, you just lose your country, which is very interesting. Many of the step chords at the start of the game are ABC, or if you, which nicely fits into other mechanics. Yes, I do like the acronym for ABC being army-based countries, or if you're in sales, always be closing. Yeah, shout out to sales. Extra territorial countries. This one, for me, is going to be kind of the most interesting one, and one I would want to play as. And we see here all the trade banks. These are countries that are based around the buildings that they own. They can't own land directly, but they can have subjects that own land. Their buildings often have pops directly linked to the building, and those pops are also tied to the country. One risk with them is they need to keep positive relations with the places that they own buildings on, or they may not be able to survive. So this is interesting, a little bit more Diplo-oriented perhaps, but it's going to be based around finance, or, always be closing. Okay. There are many different types of playable entities that simulate these types of systems, and here are a few of them. We have banking countries. There are a few countries in Europe at the start of the game, with Peruzzi and Bardi, and later on you get the Fuggers, hopefully I pronounced that correct, and more. They have main offices in certain cities and the possibility to branch out and build more branches around the world. So, being able to play as a bank sounds dope as hell. Now, the one downside is, of course, the game is built up around playing, I think, as far as I understand, as a settled country, so you might be a little bit light on the content if you decide to play as a bank, but this sounds super cool conceptually. Other countries can request loans from them, and they have the diplomatic ability to take over any estate loan that a country has and force that country to pay interest to them instead. That sounds super interesting, and also definitely a feature of the rising of banks was something that happened kind of in the period following the Crusades, as far as I remember from history, and so this is kind of fits into that time period where banks were starting to have an enormous amount of power, but before there was kind of the rise of more national centralization of power. So it'll be interesting to see if you can look to build a hegemony just through banking alone. It's the art of the deal. They also have a far lower interest rate on their estate loans, so that they can easily become rich from other countries' debts. So you take a loan for a lower interest rate than you give, and you just keep on doing this over and over and over again, and then you need to maintain good relations with people. We see banking traditions, income from minting, plus in total loan capacity is bigger, and unlocks takeover loan, which allows you to take over someone's loan so that they have to pay you more interest. Now, I'm assuming, even if you're making more money, you might have to engage in a little bit of military action in order to enforce or maintain your ability to have countries not just tell you to shove it. But that is going to be something we'll learn more about later. This advance is only available for banking countries. Okay. Next, we have trade companies. During the Age of Reformation, you can set up trade companies in overseas places, which will be a good subject to get trade going to benefit their overlord. We will go in more detail of these in later Tinto talks. Very excited about the colonialization game and the prospect of playing a trade company. And then we have the Hanseatic League, which is going to be probably a bit of a unique country, but okay. This is represented by a building-based country, which has a few subjects that are normal land-owning countries. That does sound very interesting. So the country itself doesn't have any land, but it has a bunch of countries that are subjects that own land. This is a playable country from the start, and one that is really fun if you want to if you want to focus on a purely trading game. I do, so this sounds very exciting to me. Maybe the trade monopolies and estate privileges is less than good for us. We do see trade monopolies, but is there something? I mean, we just see red and we think it's bad. Okay. It's harder to make sense of all of this in terms of how valuable this is going to be, but this is our merchant capacity. I assume we're getting some sort of trade-off from the trade monopolies. Get it? Okay. We also have Holy Orders, building-based type of country, and while I can't go into the details about it at this point, I assume it's slated for another Tinto talk. At the start of the game, the daimyos of Japan are using the building-based country mechanic. So we all know that players want one thing, and it's F in Japan content, so that'll be super cool as well. And this is like, just in principle, this is all just the ability to do all this is huge, because I can only imagine the amount of mods you can make, with these types of flexibility to try and better simulate whatever it is that you want to do. So, for example, like, you could make a Lord of the Rings mod, right, where, Gandalf or the wizards or the Astari, right, are operate as using the framework, of extraterritorial countries, or maybe that doesn't make as much sense for Saruman, but maybe for Gandalf it would make sense to use. I think the implications regarding modding are just absolutely enormous, because you don't need stuff tied to a location. You could have the Fellowship of the Ring, right, be an army-based country, or maybe that doesn't make sense, and that the Fellowship just travels and like this type of stuff. And looks to recruit troops out from, lands as it passes through, so you recruit, like, Theoden and, like, the Rohirrim. I don't even know. This is a massive tangent. But the point is like, the amount of modding you can do when you have a framework that allows for all this type of stuff is absolutely insane. You just need a building that is your kind of home base. Okay. And then we have Society of Pops, which do not require it. Now, Society of Pops, they do say at the end, not going to be playable, at the start date, because the play patterns aren't interesting enough. But that is because the play patterns aren't interesting enough, and not just some sort of mechanical inability is also going to be interesting. And this is maybe something we see down the road as a DLC, and kind of also an unlocking as of something more you can do. But okay, let's get into it. This is one of the most challenging types of countries in the game, as most of the mechanics are not available to them. Okay, they own no land, but are instead based entirely upon the pops associated with them. Now, my understanding is that this is a little bit, it's not something that is like inside of your country, there's another country, and that country is of pops. It seems to be that this is mainly for people you can colonize. But if you can have a bunch of different societies inside your own country that are operating as countries themselves, that would be insane. And that would also like be what you would need in order to better simulate this sort of ability, to better simulate social factors. You would really need something like that. And if that's something they've looked into or tried, that would be insane. Again, big thing is that performance is like, okay, how's the performance going to be on these games? On this game. As they do not own land, they do not interact with RGOs, and nor can they build most buildings. Almost all of them start without advances for taxation, codifying laws, or constructing cities. A lot of the world has different societies of pops, where the larger the group of people live, but are on the fringe of more organized and advanced states. So on the fringe of more organized and advanced states is the thing that is hinting that it is not, there's not like the Society of Pops of French within France. In the New World, they're a mixture of settled countries and Society of Pops. So that'll be interesting. Of course, like, countries like Maya and Aztec are settled, and then the more nomadic ones, I'm assuming, are going to be the Society of Pops, and that's the way it's going to operate. These types of countries can migrate their pops from one province to another over time, and they can also force the allegiance of pops to change to them through warfare with another society, which means you can raise armies. The borders between different societies and even several settled countries are extremely fluid, and they can be in the same location as either one of them. This is, this is groundbreaking in terms of the internal logic of the game, which, like, I'm not a modder, and so, like, I I think that how significant this is somewhat lost on me in my ability to articulate it. But this just, it seems to be like open up the entire like new floodgate of terms of like what you could potentially mod, and it'll be very exciting to see like what people do. They can raise levies directly from their pops, and their armies that can live off the land anywhere, gathering a small amount of food from any type of land. Their armies can always force pops of another culture and religion to swear allegiance to their society. Among the ways they can stop being colonized is forcing colonizers to the peace table, forcing them to cancel their colonial charters. A settled country can, in a war, force society of pops to abandon pops that they own, and if that they own, shout out to slavery, we hate to see it, and if they no longer own any pops, that society will no longer be an existing country. So it's just a matter of having pops belong. A society of pops can attempt to settle if they achieve certain advances, after which they can take over locations where they have pops and are the dominant culture and religion, and then become a settled country. Now, this is interesting because in theory, you can have an overlap, of locations that you're in and a settled country is in, and then you spread more pops there than they have, and then you take their land, or your own land, as you see it. Currently, though, the gameplay experience is not where we want it, and unless it is improved by the beta, they're very likely to only be AI. They're very likely to be AI only at release. So, and this isn't necessarily a shocker. I think that from a content creator perspective, I think one of the things that I've seen a content creator just like absolutely hate the most was like playing in Australia as like a migratory pops in EU4. And so I imagine it's just not there. But if they're working on it, in theory, it might get there at some point. Here, the Kven people have settled, and to clarify, the society of peoples in army-based countries have ways to become settled countries through mechanics, but there's no normal way of changing country types except through special events. And I assume there's not a way to become an army-based country or a society of peoples. Okay. Stay tuned, as next week we go into detail about buildings you can build outside of your country, which is very exciting as well. We got foreign investment in Victoria 3, and then just on the heel of that, we're going to see some in Europa Universalis 5. But that is going to be the Happy Wednesday on a Friday. You love to see it. Let me pay you Friday for the happiness of Wednesday. But next up, we have the Horn of Africa on Tinto maps. Now, I haven't read through this at all yet, and so this will be the first time kind of looking through it here, and we're going to do it together. Hello and welcome to one more week of Tinto maps. They're not on board with the Happy Fridays yet. Johan has been kind of killing it. I think he's like 7 or 8 weeks in a row now with the Happy Wednesday. Even though we weren't here for the Happy Wednesday, he was here, and that's what counts. I'm sorry to everyone for my failure to make the Happy Wednesday on a Wednesday, but we have a Happy Wednesday on a Friday. After a short break, we're back to the duty of sharing more maps. Yay! Today we will look at the region in the Horn of Africa, so let's take a look at it without further ado. This actually, in terms of word count, this may be the littlest amount of ado we've ever seen in an intro. So let's get into it. Here we have the countries around Nubia, Ethiopia, and Somalia. The first ones are organized around ancient kingdoms of Makuria and Alodia, which control the Upper Nile region. Then the second, we have the Emperor. Ethiopia stands as the main power, with some smaller countries around it. Finally, the two Islamic sultanates of Efat and Ajuran stand as the main powers in the Horn of Somalia. Finally, did they start two sentences with finally? We hate to see it. Finally they did it. Okay, but to be fair, whenever I'm critiquing like the writing, these are also like the people who write these, their primary career is like not writing copy, and I don't know if they have an editor, but okay. I'm just like noticing it in real time rather than like trying to make some criticism of their writing, since that's not like what their primary profession is. They're just reporting to us the details, and of course we are happy to receive it. Finally, around the African Great Lakes, there's another country that can be considered a settled one, Kitara, and then we have probably the most miserable start, or at least as in Victoria 3. We see some dynasties map mode. The dynasties of the Horn, there are some historical ones, while some are randomly generated. The most famous one is probably the Ethiopian House of Solomon, aka Tuwodros? Is that Tuwodros? Where all their Negus come from. I don't know how to pronounce that. The Walshma, ruler over both Ifat and Ajuran, and we have some others such as the Medri of Medri Bari, Umar of Mogadishu, the Banu Khans of Mukuria, or the Baranzi of Kitara. So hopefully I pronounced all those right, but of course it's almost certain that I did not, but we will continue. We have Societies of Pops that we saw introduced on kind of Wednesday, except we saw it today because today is a happy Wednesday on a Friday. But we do see a couple of these, and so it is definitely timely. We see the Oromo people, and we'll get a little bit of an intro. A new map has popped up. Here you can see the countries that we consider Societies of Pops as they were presented in the last Tinto talk, aka 5 minutes ago. We have the famous Oromo people in the lands between Ethiopia, Ifat, and Ajuran. The Kunma Gamuz and the Berta in the lands of Ethiopia and Aloda, and so that's there. And the Zagwa people to the north of Wadai. There are a few more to the west, but we shall share a picture in Western Africa thread as it's more appropriate there. There are more stateless societies of this kind that we would like to add in the future if it is possible to do in our schedule. I imagine, generally speaking, or at least in Victoria 3, and as far as I can tell from other game releases, but I wasn't quite as lost in the sauce in terms of like what's going on in these games. It often seems that a lot of the information in Africa tends to be wrong or incomplete. Super cool that they've gone into this level, that they're trying to make things like as realistic as possible they can on start, and of course they've been very receptive to feedback all throughout this maps process, and also been asking for feedback. So if you know more about the history and the people of this region, feel free, and they get something wrong, feel free to let them know. We see a bunch of different locations. We're not going to look at the detailed location map, but we do love to see the pretty colors. Locations, exclam, big nice. You may notice that the density is quite unequal. Unfortunately, the archaeological findings for the period are scarce, which is, of course, why a lot of the stuff is... it tends to be easier when you have a history, when your history chronologically, like, is coming from these Western European countries. It's much easier to get the Western European countries right on these games, because, and also it's the recorded history of those countries is probably better. So specifically, out of the most known areas, a lack of urbanization in most of the area has made finding of the proper non-anachronistic settlements quite a challenge. Keep this in mind when making suggestions. Okay, winky. We love to see it. It has been that dramatic in some areas that we had to use names of tribes and rivers, a bit contradicting our own rules, but the areas had to be represented as they were active parts of development of the region. One thing, a big chunk of the Arabian Peninsula can be seen in today's Tinto maps, but please reserve feedback for it for a future dev diary, where we will show all of the peninsula. Apart from that, you can see a more detailed map if you click on the spoiler button, as per usual. We do love to see the spoilers, and here we see the provinces. We're not going to try and pronounce all of these, but we do see them. The density is also, we do see, yeah, this is much less dense, this is more dense, definitely a lot less dense here. I have, in terms of geography and knowledge of the resources of the region, definitely not my forte at all. I don't usually play in this region in map games, and so we do see a lot of Ethiopia and Somalia type of names and this type of stuff. Nubia is actually a country that long ago I did a lot of research on, but that was more ancient Nubia, not the region of Nubia as of the start date of the game in 1337 of the big secret, big top game. Here we see terrain, and that is interesting. I did not realize that this was the situation. It makes sense. I mean, I didn't think it was something other than this, but we see a very sharp delineation of arid and tropical. I know that there's some efforts to actually push back the Sahara in a northward fashion through reforestation and the like of this, and it's super fascinating, that type of stuff. Like, if they dig ditches in a particular way for the shade, and like it makes it easier to plant trees and like this type of stuff. Really interesting I wish I had a good link to suggest for that. But the idea that you can reclaim desert area, like, and it's not just lost forever to being inhospitable is super interesting. And this sharp, kind of just arid into tropical is a little bit wild to see. But we see a little bit of oceanic in there and a little bit of continental. Okay. Here we see, okay. This is the, what is the vegetation, and this is the climate. So climate, we see vegetation, mono desert, but we do see sparse and then grasslands. Okay, so this is a little bit more gradual, and I think that if we line this up, the sparse is part of the arid up there. It's a little bit difficult to tell, but I think that... Oh, no, wait, the sparse is part of the tropical. So if we look at, I think you can see my cursor, if we look at this line here, it's very similar to this line here, with some of the sparse here being part of the desert. But okay, we do see this forest area here, and then this is, okay, the vegetation is a little bit more kind of in line what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking it was going to be, but tropical just to arid with no continental is a little bit of an easy, interesting one. But we see a bunch of grasslands, some woods, some forests. I don't remember there being that much wood in Victoria 3. But we do see a lot of sparse, and okay, in Victoria 3 this is like a really rough region to play in because there is basically no places where that have both wood and iron. There's a little bit of iron right here, and then there's a bunch of wood kind of, I guess, right around here. So they're consistent with the resources and such, and then we do see a bunch of wood down here. We see some flatland, some hills and plateaus, a little bit interesting. Some mountainous territory too, so that's going to be strategically interesting if you're kind of fighting your way through that region. Always kind of curious to see the areas that are just completely impassable. The terrain types of the region are quite interesting and diverse. It is marked by the Rift Valley, which creates biomes such as the Ethiopian highlands and plateau or the Great African Lakes. That also marks a divide between arid, tropical, and oceanic climates. The vegetation of the region also ranges from desert to sparse to jungle forests. And one more note, you may note that marshes have been renamed into wetlands, as we could put some work into that suggestion last week. That makes sense. That they would do that. A little bit interesting. But whereas the Rift Valley is like in here, right? So... okay. Here we see natural harbors. You love to see them. So there is some here. A little bit of a bay here, so that makes sense. Okay. Here we see cultures. We're not going to try and pronounce a lot of this stuff. But we will read through it. We will try and pronounce it. I just know I'm going to butcher all of it. Another interesting map this week, you may notice the lands of Ethiopia have a very mixed cultural situation. Yep, a lot of cross-hatching, which indicates mixed groups. While more to the west and south, we are representing tribal lands in a more homogeneous way, with kind of fixed boundaries to represent different groupings. This doesn't mean that there won't be a mixing of cultures, but this was one of the first areas to receive a minority review, and the scope was mostly limited to Ethiopia. Okay. Minorities review. So we do see, okay, Ethiopia is the one with a lot of kind of differences in culture, or a lot of the cross hatching, and we don't see a lot extending outward, and so they're going to include some of the other stuff. I have to, in my mind, there's not like a lot of like recorded history from this time period probably to lean on, but also I don't speak languages like indigenous to this area, and there might be a lot of like history. It's just locked behind languages, which is like something that's very interesting. You definitely see it a lot in terms of academic philosophy, where like a lot of philosophy is like language locked until there's a translation. And then even then, like some things don't get translated very well, or like the stylistic translation's a little bit off. I think, like for example, I don't think there was a full translation of The Second Sex from Simone de Beauvoir until recently, which I have a copy of, and the one that had been translated before was like, not only was it an abridged version, It also like mistranslated like some words that were like an essential and core part of her philosophy that don't get mistranslated with Sartre, who kind of had a similar philosophy. I forget like the words like being or essence or something like this didn't get translated like properly, and so it's just like just creates a bit of a situation. And so of course if there is information, it's probably not in Swedish or English, which makes it much less accessible, or if there's good information. So okay, next we have religion. We do see a bit of Sunni, Miaphysite, and Shiite. I thought there was Coptic, wasn't there? Another interesting map. The Miaphysite and Sunni are the most widespread religions in the region. While not all the areas have mixed populations, such as Nubia, you may notice they will eventually, as we will cover more of the map in our sprints. Animism is a likely placeholder as usual, and you see pockets of it here and there. If you have specific suggestions, please do them. You also notice a minority inside Ethiopia, a purple minority inside Ethiopia. That's representing the Beta Israel Judaism in the provinces of Semien, of course. Of course. Okay. And here we see raw materials, which is always kind of the map I'm most interested in. We see what looks like a lot of gold, but is that these are just big locations maybe? Actually, we see a ton of gold. Gold, 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 gold. We also see gems. Is that gems down there as well? Outrageous. Truly. Truly. We see some wheat in here. Is there iron here? Can we zoom in? There is iron here. There's a little iron here in Victoria 3. We do see the iron, the one kind of saving grace in terms of resources. We see coffee. We see mostly livestock, but the really interesting one is that there appears to just be an enormous amount of gold, right, relative to the other countries. And I guess also, alongside that, not a lot of mineral resources. There's a little bit of iron down here, but it's like iron and iron. I know there's coal in this region, like from Victoria 3, but there's probably other stuff that they wanted to represent here. We do see a little bit of wood too, right? What's sturdy grains? I don't remember that. But okay. We see it's okay. It's mostly foodstuffs, right? Okay, and then also a ton of gold. The raw materials of the week. A big chunk of the region has livestock as its main raw material, and while also some of agricultural, such as wheat and sturdy grains here and there. The most unique good in the region is coffee. We do see big chunks of coffee, which is cultivated in the Ethiopian highlands. Recall that this was kind of plateaus, right? If we see here, up here, this was the plateau region. And there's also some precious resources spread here and there, such as gold, ivory, gems, and incense. We didn't really notice the incense too much. Definitely saw some ivory. Ivory here, ivory here, ivory here, ivory here. But where's the incense? Does it make sense? You know what makes sense? Mints make sense. They do. That they do. Okay. Here are our markets. We see Axum, Mogadishu, Adan, and Mecca. The main market of the regions are Axum and Mogadishu. Man, I just fanatically love saying Mogadishu. With Adan, Aden being one of the main controlling access of the Red Sea. We do see the Red Sea right there. There are some weird calculations ongoing on the Somalian lands that have already been reported, and we'll take a look and see why it's happening. So, yeah, the Axum splitting the Adenese market is probably something they don't want in game, but they're reporting on it. And population, we do get to see how many people are here, which is of course an important consideration. 1.2 million, 500k, 400k, 800k, 500k. So what is this? 1.2, 2.5, 3.5 plus a smattering of others. I guess another 700 here. So maybe 5 million in total in this region, not including kind of the Arabian Peninsula. The population of the region, there are approximately 12.3 billion people in the Eastern African subcontinent. I take it all back. Some of these have to have really big pops then. Wait, how do they get to 12.5? I'm so confused. Is that including this? But even including that, where are they all at? 12.3 people in Eastern African subcontinent, although take in account it also compromises the regions of the Southern Great Lakes, okay, which we're not covering, and the Swahili coast, which we haven't shown today, so we'll probably have to discount around 4 million people from it, so that's around 8 million. Swahili coast accounts for 1.7, and Great Lakes for 4. Although that region is divided between today's and next week's Tinto talks for a total of around 8 million. Okay, that's all. That's all for today. Speaking of next week's Tinto maps, it will likely be a meaty cover over Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa. See you. So that'll be really exciting. I've been meaning to look up and like read more about specifically sub-Saharan African history, because this is just a huge gaping hole in terms of like my knowledge base in terms of geopolitical history, and so I'm trying to pay more attention to some of this stuff, but very exciting to see this Tinto map and of course the Tinto talks. I hope you enjoyed, whether it be on a Friday or a Wednesday, but in the future, that is today, from the past Wednesday that was before, which was the Happy Wednesday, but we wished it a Happy Wednesday on a Friday. But without further, if you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, YouTube algorithm stuff, etc., mostly etc. We also have links down below to various things like Patreon, socials, this type of stuff. But other than that, have a happy Wednesday on a Friday. No, we got blurry. When did that happen? Hopefully we haven't been blurry for a half hour. Anyways, bye-bye now.